What if the most mocked golfer of this generation turns out to be the most misunderstood athlete in modern sports history? For years, people laughed at him. They called him weird, obsessive, even arrogant. They rolled their eyes every time he pulled out a notebook full of scientific formulas on a golf course where tradition, feel, and gut instinct had ruled for over a century. But here's the twist absolutely nobody saw coming. Some of the biggest legends in the history of golf are now saying, on record, that Bryson DeChambeau has something no other player on tour possesses. Not just power, not just talent. Something rarer, something almost impossible to teach, something that separates generational athletes from everyone else chasing the same trophy. So what exactly is it? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the golf world is finally taking Bryson seriously, and why the very things people once ridiculed him for might be the exact reason he becomes one of the most dominant and influential players of this entire era. Let's rewind to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with success. It starts with public humiliation. When Bryson first arrived on tour, he didn't look or sound like a typical golfer. He carried around a notebook filled with physics equations. He talked about single plane swings, launch angles, spin rates, and ball compression like he was defending a doctoral thesis instead of preparing for a Sunday tea time. Commentators laughed on live broadcasts. Fans mocked him relentlessly on social media. He earned the nickname The Scientist, and for a long time it wasn't meant as a compliment, it was meant as an insult, a way of saying he didn't belong. But here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. What happens when the person everyone laughs at turns out to be years ahead of everyone else in the room? That's exactly what started happening, slowly, quietly, one tournament at a time. Bryson didn't just study golf the way other players studied it, he deconstructed the entire sport, piece by piece, like an engineer taking apart a machine to understand exactly why every single component works the way it does. While other players relied on feel, instinct, and decades of inherited traditional coaching passed down from teacher to student, Bryson built his entire game from raw data. He transformed his body through an almost obsessive strength and nutrition program, adding significant muscle mass in a sport where bulking up had always been considered unnecessary, even taboo. He didn't just want to hit the ball far, he wanted to understand precisely, mathematically, why certain swing mechanics generated more clubhead speed, and then he engineered both his body and his equipment to maximize every fraction of that advantage. And it worked, in ways even his critics couldn't ignore. Bryson became one of the longest hitters in the history of professional golf, regularly overpowering courses that had frustrated and humbled golfers for decades before him. But here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because power alone has never been enough to win championships. Plenty of long hitters come and go without ever winning a single major title. So what is the real thing golf legends are now pointing to when they talk about Bryson? It's not his distance off the tee, it's his relentless, almost obsessive commitment to problem solving. Bryson approaches every single round like a puzzle that must be solved with precision, not emotion. While other golfers talk about staying present, trusting their gut, and playing on feel, Bryson talks about wind resistance, dew point, barometric pressure, and the exact mathematical probability of certain shot outcomes. To some people, that sounds cold, robotic, even joyless. But to golf legends who have spent decades watching thousands of talented players rise and quietly disappear, it sounds like something exceptionally rare, an athlete who refuses to accept "that's just how it's always been done" as a satisfying answer. Think about that for a second, because it applies far beyond golf. How many people in any profession are actually willing to question everything, even when the entire established industry insists they're wrong? Bryson faced years of relentless public criticism for his unconventional approach. Analysts openly questioned whether his methods would ever hold up under real championship pressure. Fans debated endlessly whether a science-first, almost mechanical mindset could ever translate into the kind of clutch, high-pressure wins that define legendary careers. And for a long stretch of time, doubt genuinely seemed to be winning that argument. Even Bryson himself has admitted there were moments of intense self-doubt, moments where the criticism felt overwhelming, where being labeled an outsider in his own sport took a real psychological toll. But then came the moments that finally silenced the loudest critics. When Bryson broke through and captured major championship glory, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was validation for an entirely different philosophy of competing. Suddenly, the notebook full of formulas didn't look strange anymore. It looked like a blueprint the rest of the sport had been too afraid to follow. Golf legends who had once publicly questioned his methods started acknowledging something undeniable, something they couldn't dismiss any longer: his ability to adapt under pressure, to relentlessly refine his craft after every single round, and to treat failure not as a personal defeat, but as raw data to be analyzed and improved upon, is something almost no one else in the sport possesses at that same level of intensity. Now here's the emotional core of this story, the part that so often gets buried underneath talk of launch angles and swing speed. Bryson has openly dealt with serious health struggles that genuinely threatened to derail his career, including painful issues with his hip and hand that required surgery and forced him away from competitive golf at a time when he was performing at an elite, career-defining level. Imagine building your entire identity, your entire sense of self, around precision, control, and data, only to have your own body betray you in ways that science and preparation couldn't immediately fix. That is a gut-wrenching, disorienting position for any elite athlete to find themselves in. Yet instead of retreating into frustration or self-pity, Bryson doubled down on the exact same relentless, analytical mindset that had built his career in the first place, treating his own physical recovery as just another complex problem waiting to be solved. That kind of resilience, that refusal to abandon his core identity even in the face of real physical pain, is exactly what golf legends now say sets him apart from almost every other player of his generation. Not just physical talent or raw power, but a mental architecture built specifically for obsession, adaptation, and constant reinvention, even when the odds and the public narrative are stacked against him. So why does any of this actually matter to you, sitting here watching this video right now? Because Bryson's story is so much bigger than golf. It's a story about what happens when someone refuses to accept the traditional path simply because everyone else follows it without question. It's a story about the emotional courage it takes to be publicly mocked for years, sometimes on national television, before anyone finally admits you might have been right all along. How many times in your own life have you held back an idea, a project, or a completely different way of doing something because it felt too unconventional, too likely to invite ridicule or criticism from people around you? Bryson didn't hold back. He leaned fully into being different, even when it cost him public approval, endorsements, and years of relentless mockery. And now, the very legends who once doubted him publicly are the ones defending his legacy just as publicly. There's something almost poetic, almost cinematic about that complete reversal. The sport that once demanded strict conformity to tradition is now quietly being reshaped by the one player who categorically refused to conform to it. Bryson didn't just change how far a golf ball can physically travel. He fundamentally changed the blueprint for what it means to be a modern elite athlete. Part fierce competitor, part obsessive scientist, part relentless student of his own failures. And that raises the real, lingering question this entire story leaves behind. Is Bryson DeChambeau simply a great golfer who happened to win big at the right moments? Or is he something far rarer, a genuine preview of where every single sport is eventually headed, once data, biomechanics, and pure obsession fully replace old-fashioned tradition? If this story surprised you, if it made you completely rethink everything you thought you already knew about Bryson DeChambeau, hit that like button right now before you scroll away, subscribe for more deep dives into the athletes who are quietly reshaping their sports from the inside out, and drop a comment below telling me whether you honestly believe Bryson's science-driven approach represents the future of golf, or whether it's something no other player could ever fully replicate. Because this conversation around Bryson is just getting started, and you genuinely don't want to miss what comes next.